Lucius Verus, born in AD 130, serving as a Roman emperor from AD 161 to 169, alongside his adoptive brother Marcus Aurelius, marking a rather rare instance of co-emperorship in Roman history. Appointed by Emperor Antoninus Pius, Lucius Verus was known for his charismatic personality, patronage of the arts, which complemented Marcus Aurelius's stoic and philosophical demeanor. Despite lacking the same level of military skill as his co-ruler, Verus played a significant role in the successful Parthian War between 161 and 166, leading Roman forces to victory and securing the eastern borders. His reign also saw advancements in Roman infrastructure and public welfare, reflecting his commitment to the prosperity of the empire. Thus, his legacy is intertwined with that of Marcus Aurelius, as their joint rule exemplified a more balanced approach to leadership, blending military campaign with cultural and administrative achievements. But his untimely death occurred in AD 169 and led to Marcus Aurelius becoming the sole emperor. He is remembered for his contributions to Rome's stability and his role in one of the empire's most cooperative and effective administrations. Welcome to the channel. Good to have you here with me today, or this evening, wherever you're watching from. Let me know where you're watching from. That's an interesting way of doing it. And of course, if you want to support the channel, you're already doing it by watching. Just hit the like and subscribe if you feel like it. And with that being said, let's get on with the video. We talk today about Lucius Verus, one that often lives in the shadow of his co-ruler. But we should talk about him, and that's what we're going to do. So, sit back and relax, we can get into it. Lucius Caonius Commodus, later known just as Lucius Verus, was born on December 15th, 130, to Avidia and Lucius Aelius Caesar, who was Emperor Hadrian's first adopted son and designated heir. Raised in Rome, Verus had two sisters, Caonia Fabia and Caonia Plautia. His maternal lineage included the senator Gaius Avidius Nigrinus and the noblewoman Plautia, although it's important to mention that her identity remains somewhat less documented. When Verus's father died on January 1st, 138, Hadrian named Titus Aurelius Antoninus as his new heir and bestowed upon him the title of Caesar. Hadrian directed Antoninus to adopt both Lucius and Hadrian's nephew by marriage, Marcus. This arrangement preserved Lucius's status as Hadrian's adoptive grandson. Additionally, Antoninus engaged his daughter Faustina to Lucius, but this did not last. Their engagement was soon annulled. Following the death of Hadrian, Antoninus proposed a change in the marriage arrangements. He asked Marcus to dissolve his betrothal to Caonia Fabia and instead marry Faustina, while also counseling Faustina's engagement to Lucius. After a little back and forth, Marcus agreed to this proposal. And so, as future emperor, Verus received an excellent education under the guidance of the renowned grammarian Marcus Cornelius Fronto, known for his romantic poetry and oratory. Verus embarked on his political career early. 1 year before the legal age, he became a quaestor in 153. Somewhat unusual, usually must conform to that age limit. but once again, friends in high places. And so we get to March the 7th of the year 161, and Emperor Antoninus Pius passes away. His successor, Marcus Aurelius, ascends to the throne. Now it's important to mention that Marcus's deep admiration for Antoninus is evident in his first book of the Meditations, where he reflects on the values and character he learned from his predecessor. Although the Senate initially intended for Marcus to rule alone, he really dug his boots in and insisted on sharing power with his adoptive brother, Lucius Verus. In fact, he refused to assume office until Lucius received equal authority. Well, the Senate really had no choice but to agree, and Lucius was granted the title of Augustus, along with the imperium and senatorial tribunal powers. In their official titles, Marcus became Imperator Caesar Marcus Aurelius Antoninus Augustus, while Lucius, previously known as Commodus, took the name Imperator Caesar Lucius Aurelius Verus Augustus. The name Verus had been Marcus's family name, and the choice highlighted their familial bond. With both men holding the title of emperor, Rome experienced a historic first. Two people in power. A first joint rule. No, they were technically equals. Marcus held greater authority due to his seniority and experience. Marcus had served as consul more frequently than Verus, you see. He'd been actively involved in the administration under Antoninus Pius and held the prestigious role of Pontifex Maximus. These distinctions made his superior position rather clear to the public. One biographer had noted that Verus obeyed Marcus, as a lieutenant would obey a proconsul or as a governor would obey the emperor. And of course, Verus's respect for Marcus's leadership was visible in his deferential conduct, showing their collaborative yet hierarchically distinct relationship. Almost immediately after receiving confirmation from the Senate, the emperors made their way to the Castra Praetoria, which is the camp of the Praetorian Guard military. Lucius delivered a speech to the assembled troops, who subsequently proclaimed the two individuals to be imperiores. Then, just like every other new emperor that has come after Claudius, Lucius made a promise to the troops on a special donation. On the other hand, this donation was twice as large as those that had been given in the past. 20,000 sesterces, 5,000 denarii per person, and more was given to the officers. But as a condition for receiving this bounty, which was equivalent to several years' worth of pay, the soldiers had to take an oath to safeguard the emperors. I can't imagine that it was much of a difficult decision. I mean, that's a lot of money. Now, given that Marcus's accession had been peaceful and unopposed, the ceremony might not have been entirely necessary. However, as we usually discuss, when this happens, it's certainly a good insurance policy against any future military conflicts. Within a short period of time following the accession to emperors, Marcus's daughter, Annia Lucilla, who was only 11 years old at the time, became engaged to Lucius, despite the fact that he is technically her uncle. Well, along the same lines as earlier imperial foundations, new provisions were made for the support of children who were living in poverty during the ceremonies that were held to commemorate the event on the occasion. Marcus and Lucius were well liked by the Roman populace, who enthusiastically congratulated them on their lack of pomp, their civilitary behavior. Now, this behavior is pretty evident in the fact that we have a writer by the name of Marullus at the time who was criticizing them without any fear of retribution. Now, if that doesn't show that you're pro-free speech almost 2,000 years ago, I don't know what does. It is possible, of course, that he would have been put to death under a different emperor and at a different time, but fortunately, he was not under a different emperor, and it was not a different time, so he was free to write whatever he liked. On the other hand, it was in general a time of tranquility and forgiveness. In light of this, Verus's biographer had wrote that no one had missed the lenient ways of Pius. Now, in the early morning hours of March 28th, Fronto made his way back to his Roman townhouse. He had left his residence in Cirta as soon as he received news that his students had been admitted. In a letter that he addressed to Charilas, the imperial freedman, he inquired about the possibility of addressing the emperors. Later on, Fronto would explain that he had not the courage to write the emperors directly. He felt an overwhelming sense of pride, however, for his students rising to such a lofty position. Well, I mean, it can't get much higher than being emperor, can't it? When Fronto reflected on the speech he had written on taking his consulship in 143, in which he praised the young Marcus, he was filled with jubilance. He said, "There was then an outstanding natural ability in you. Now there is a perfected excellence." However, Marcus was the only person that Fronto called upon. Neither of them thought to invite Lucius, which is a bit of a shame. You feel bad for him. But like I said, consistently a life overshadowed by his co-ruler. This was also because of the fact that Lucius's interests were really not as high as his brother. Therefore his tutor Fronto really held him in lower regard. He was just not as bookish. Of course, early on in their reigns, both of the emperors had very smooth transitions. Marcus was able to devote his entire being to the cultivation of popular affection and the pursuit of these philosophical ideals. In the spring, there were a few minor problems that arose, but there will be more problems in the future. You see, a significant portion of Rome was actually obliterated when the Tiber River overflowed its banks in the spring of 162, and no amount of fancy philosophy is going to clean that mess up. Time to roll up the sleeves. It caused the city to be in a state of famine by drowning many animals. Both Marcus and Licinius focused their attention on the crisis that was occurring. And it has been said that during other periods of famine, the Roman emperors were responsible for providing food for the Italian communities using the Roman granaries. Now, during his final moments, Pius had spoke only about the state and foreign kings who wronged him, and he didn't mention much of anything else. In 161, one of these kings that he had mentioned by name, Vologases IV of Parthia, made his move sometime between the end of summer and the beginning of autumn. After entering the kingdom of Armenia, which was a Roman client state at the time, Vologases removed the king from power and installed his own Pacorus, who was also an Arsacid like him. An individual named Lucius Aelius Cornelianus served as governor of Syria during the time of this invasion. Despite the fact that Aetidius's term as governor was set to expire in 161, he was kept in that position through lack of any suitable replacement. This was most likely done to prevent the Parthians from having the opportunity to surprise his inexperienced successor. Marcus Aurelius Severianus, a Gaul with a great deal of experience in matter pertaining to military affairs, served as the governor of Cappadocia, which was the front line in all Armenian conflicts. His character, however, was negatively impacted as a result of his time spent in the East. Alexander of Abanoticus. He was a self-proclaimed prophet who carried a snake named Glycon around with him, but he was really just a con man. Severianus had fallen under the influence of Alexander. In addition to being friends with a large number of members of the East Roman elite, Alexander was the father of the esteemed senator Publius Mummius Sisenna Rutilianus, who was serving as the proconsul of Asia at the time. Alexander was successful in persuading Severianus that he could easily defeat the Parthians and achieve the glory all for himself. One can hardly turn that down, can't they? And so they found themselves in Elegia, a town located just beyond the Cappadocian frontiers, high up past the headwaters of the Euphrates River. Severianus led a legion into Armenia, possibly the 9th Hispania. But Chosroes, the great Parthian general, was able to capture him there. Despite the fact that Severianus made an effort to fight Chosroes, he quickly realized that his campaign was fruitless, and took the self-checkout line. Rest in peace to him. Of course, there was a massacre of the legion, and this was only 3 days into the campaign. They did not get very far. Of course, it was possible that war would also break out on other frontiers. We're talking Britain, Upper Germany, and Raetia. And in Upper Germany there was more of a risk because that was where the Chatti of the Taunus Mountains had recently crossed into parts bordering Roman territory. They were not prepared for this. The biographer writes that Marcus Aurelius spent the entirety of Pius's 23-year reign at his emperor's side and not in the provinces, where the majority of previous emperors had spent their early careers. So he was not prepared for anything in terms of war, the bloody reality of living on the frontier. It appears that Pius just did not provide him with any military experience at all, and so Marcus was responsible for making the necessary appointments, and he succeeded Severianus as governor of Cappadocia by sending Marcus Statius Priscus, who was the governor of Britain at the time. Priscus's previous position was taken over by Sextus Calpurnius Agricola. The army of Avidius Cornelianus had been defeated in a battle against the Parthians, and they had retreated in disarray. This was the latest piece of news that the Romans had got, and was certainly very demoralizing. But also, news was beginning to spread, and when news of Roman defeats begins to spread, the enemies of Rome become a lot more courageous. The Parthian frontier was the destination of all reinforcements sent out from Rome. An African senator named Publius Julius Germanus Marcianus, who was commanding the 10th Gemina at Vienna, embarked on a journey to Cappadocia with detachments from the Danubian legions. The first Minervia, which originated from Bonn in Upper Germany, the second Adiotrix from Aquinum, and the fifth Macedonica from Troesmes were also dispatched to the east. It was instructed to frontier governors that they should avoid conflict whenever it was possible. This was done in order to strategically weaken the northern frontiers. Well, it was all a little bit too much for Marcus, who went to Alsium, a little resort town on the coast of the Etrurian, for a public holiday that lasted 4 days, in order to relax, but, well, he was all a little bit too anxious. The declaration that he would not discuss his vacation was made in a letter sent to Fronto, and Fronto had responded with a sarcastic tone, writing somewhere along the lines of, "Am I not aware that you travelled to Alsium with the purpose of spending 4 full days in engaging in activities such as playing games and enjoying complete leisure?" He then encouraged Marcus to rest anyway, citing an example of his predecessors, being that Pius had enjoyed exercise in the palestra, fishing, comedy, etc. He went as far to write up a fable about the gods' division of the day between morning and evening on the basis that Marcus had apparently been spending the majority of his evenings on judicial matters rather than leisure. Marcus was unfortunately unable to follow Fronto's recommendations, writing back, "I have duties hanging over me that can hardly be ignored." For the purpose of reprimanding himself, Marcus put on Fronto's tone and said, "You will say that my advice has done you a lot of good." Although he had rested, and would continue to do so frequently, he was still devoted to his duties. Now, the selection of reading material that Fronto sent to Marcus included Cicero's Prolege Manilia, in which the orator had argued in favor of Pompey taking supreme command in the Mithridatic War. Fronto also sent Marcus a selection of other reading material. There was a possibility that this decision to send Lucius to the Eastern Front was influenced in some way by this reference, which was appropriate given that Pompey's war had taken him to Armenia. It was determined then that Lucius should personally lead the Parthian War during the winter of 161–62, as more alarming information became available. It didn't help that a rebellion was brewing in Syria. Just add it to the pile of worries. The argument went that he was healthier and stronger than Marcus, making him better suited to be out there in the thick of the military frontier. According to the biographer of Lucius, however, there were hidden agendas, that being to stop Lucius's vices, to teach him to be more frugal, and to change his morals by making him fear war, and to make him understand that he was indeed an emperor, and he ought to do what emperors do. In any case, Lucius departed after the Senate approved it, on his way for what I'm sure is an unforgettable experience. Marcus stayed in Rome, as the city demanded the presence of an emperor. Well, along with Lucius came 2 senators, that being Pontius Laelianus Lartius Sabinus and Ialus Bassus, as well as a member of the Praetorian Guard and one of the 2 Praetorian prefects, Furius Victorinus. Victorinus had some familiarity with Eastern affairs from his time as procurator of Galatia. Furthermore, he was more qualified than Cornelius Repentinus, his Praetorian partner, who was allegedly influenced by Pius's mistress Galeria Lysistre to hold his position. Repentinus held the title of senator, but it was only one for show. He didn't actually have any access to senatorial circles. and thus Victorinus was the obvious choice, because the guard had to be accompanied by a prefect. Laelianus had direct experience with the Eastern army and military tactics on the frontiers, having served as governor of both Pannonia and Syria in 153. As a reward for his service, he was named Augustorum, or companion of the emperors. As Fronto put it, Laelianus was a serious man and an old-fashioned disciplinarian, probably the exact kind of person they wanted Lucius to be around. Bassus, who had also come, served as the governor of Lower Moesia. In order to manage the expeditionary forces commissariat, Lucius chose his favorite freedmen, such as Agiclitus, Coetes, Eclectus, and Geminus, who resigned their positions as praefectus verhelicorum. In addition to general communications and transportation, the Misenum fleet was tasked with carrying the emperor. Marcus accompanied Lucius as he sailed from Brundisium to Capua in the summer of 162. Lucius hunted at Apulia and feasted in the country homes that he passed. At Canossa, he became ill, most likely from a mild stroke, and went to bed. Hurrying south to see him, Marcus prayed for his protection in front of the Senate. Fronto received a letter from Lucius detailing his treatment and recuperation, which eased his distress over the news. In response, Fronto suggested a few days of quiet bed rest and advised his students to control his cravings. After a fasting and a nice, good old-fashioned bloodletting, Lucius recovered, and all was well. As though in royal procession, Verus proceeded eastward through Corinth and Athens, accompanied by musicians and singers in a grand display, and on his way he joined the Eleusinian mysteries and stayed with Herodes Atticus in Athens. A falling star was seen in the sky during sacrifice, traveling from west to east, seen as a good omen. He then made an unplanned stop at Erythrae and a stop in Ephesus, where he is recorded at the estate of the local nobleman Publius Vettius Antoninus. Before reaching Antioch, the ship continued its voyage through the Aegean and along Asia Minor's southern coast, stopping briefly at the renowned pleasure resorts of Pamphylia and Cilicia. The length of Verus's eastward journey is somewhat unknown. He may not have even reached Antioch until after 162. But let's be fair, there are quite a few nice places to stop along the way. Although he wintered at Laodicea and summered at Daphne, a resort just outside of Antioch, Lucius spent the majority of the campaign in Antioch itself. Parthia, a mistress from Smyrna, was adopted by him. Lucius described her as a woman of perfect body, but his biographer refers to her more of a low-born girlfriend of his. According to one biographer, Parthia might have been more beautiful than any of the statues of Phidias and Praxiteles. But of course, always in the eye of the beholder. She also spoke Ionic Greek and had a lot of Attic wit. She was also quite good at music. Certainly a good way to charm the young Lucius. Now, after reading Lucian's initial draft, Parthia chastised him for being too flattering. She didn't want to be the next Cassiopeia, so she was afraid when he compared her to a goddess. She was also powerful. Lucius was forced to shave his beard for her. Like many other things, he was ridiculed by the Syrians for this. Of course, We can't go past the reportedly opulent lifestyle that Lucius was enjoying, and it was quite criticized by his critics, sometimes in jest, but also quite angrily criticized. Apparently he was into the old dice games, and he had turned to gambling, and one would hope that that was with his own money. He also liked being around actors, which was seen as kind of a lower profession. He specifically asked for dispatches from Rome to inform him of the progress of his chariot teams. As a sign of his team spirit, he carried a golden statue of Voluca, the green team's horse. Fronto refuted some of these accusations by arguing that Lucius's circuses were necessary to keep Roman populace in check, and just have a little bit of fun at least. But of course the old bread and circus routine is usually to distract from poor governance. Think about that next time you're watching the television. Lucius also had a big task ahead of him. Fronto used language from Corbulo's arrival a century ago to describe the scene. The long peace in the east had softened the Syrian army. They stayed in the city's outdoor areas more often than in their training grounds. So training was increased under Lucius. Pontius Laelianus gave the order to remove the padding from their saddles, toughen them up a little bit. Drinking and gambling, they were also strictly regulated. According to Fronto, Lucius led his army both on foot and on horseback. He personally examined the soldiers, as well as in the field and at the camp. At the start of the conflict, Lucius sent Fronto a few messages. He apologized in writing to Fronto for his silence. He wrote that he would not go into detail about plans that might change within a day. Not even yet has anything been accomplished such as to make me wish to invite you to share in the joy, was one of the quotes that he had wrote to him. Well, it shows how little the work had produced thus far, that's for sure. The worries that had kept Fronto awake at night were something that Lucius did not want him to experience. The breakdown of the negotiations with the Parthians following the Roman conquest of Armenia might have contributed to Lucius's hesitancy. The way Lucius presented these terms was universally viewed as cowardly, and peace did not appeal at all to the Parthians. They were in it to win it. Victory or death in a zero-sum game. Lucius established a sailing route up the Orontes because he needed to import large quantities of goods into Antioch. He ordered the digging of a new canal because the river breaks over a cliff before it reaches the city. The old riverbed of the Orontes dried up after the project was finished, revealing enormous bones. Reportedly, the bones of what they believed to be a giant. Philostratus claims that the beast they were looking at was 30 cubits tall, while Pausanias says it was more than 11. They were the bones of the river's spirit, according to an oracle. Later on it would be determined that these bones just belonged to a number of large, unidentified animals. Unfortunately, we don't have the bones anymore to check. Could have been anything. Lucius travelled to Ephesus to marry Marcus's daughter Lucilla while the war raged behind him, possibly in the fall of 163 or beginning of 164. In March of 163, Lucilla turned 13, and she was not yet 15 regardless of when she got married. Lucilla was accompanied by her mother, Faustina, and Lucius's father's half-brother, Vetelenus Civica Barbarus. Well, during the campaign season of 163, The first Minervia and fifth Macedonica, under the delegates Claudius Fronto and Marcus Verus, served under Statius Priscus in Armenia and achieved success for the Roman army, including the conquest of Artaxata, the capital of Armenia. Despite never having engaged in combat himself, Verus won the title of Armeniacus at the end of the year. Marcus refused to accept it until the following year. Marcus, however, did not think twice about bringing the Imperator second along when Lucius was proclaimed, and Imperator once more. Geminus Marcianus, a legate of the 10th Gemina, added second Adiutrix and Danubian legions then to the Syrian army as reinforcements. The reconstruction of occupied Armenia followed Roman principles, of course. Artaxata was replaced in 164 by Cain Polis, or New City, as the new capital. It was closer to the Roman border by about 30 miles. At Ekmiadzin, 400 kilometers east of Satala, under the southern face of Mount Ararat, there are documented detachments of Cappadocian legions. It's been described as a remarkable example of imperialism that would have required a march of at least 20 days through the mountainous terrain from the Roman border, and that is through very dry terrain, with not much water in between. No wonder so many legions ended up getting lost, simply being absorbed into that sand. Now, the Parthians intervened in Osroene, a Roman client in Upper Mesopotamia, just east of Syria, with its capital at Edessa, in 163, while Statius Priscus was under occupation in Armenia. They overthrew the nation's leader, Manus, and installed their own candidate, who would hold the position until 165. Issues featuring Vologases IV on the obverse and Syriac whale the king on the reverse marked the start of the Edessene coinage record. Roman troops were repositioned downstream to cross the Euphrates at a more southerly location in retaliation. Well, according to Lucian, who mentions a battle at Sura, which is on the southern side of the river, the Parthians continued to control the southern Roman bank of the Euphrates, that is on the Syrian side, as late as 163. However, Roman troops had advanced north to take control of Dausra and Nicephorium on the northern Parthian bank by the end of the year. Anthemusia, a town southwest of Edessa, was captured by other Roman forces as they advanced on the Osroene from Armenia shortly after the conquest of the north bank of the Euphrates. In 164, not much happened. A little quiet. Just how we like it. The majority of the year was, however, devoted to getting ready for another attack on Parthian territory. And so in 165, Roman armies invaded Mesopotamia, possibly under the command of Marcus Verus and the 5th Macedonica. Manus was reinstated, and Edessa was occupied again. The Parthians withdrew to Nisibis, but they were also overrun, and many prisoners were taken. The Parthian army scattered across the Tigris. Khosroes, their general, swam down the river and took refuge in a cave. A second force, led by the 3rd Gallica and Avidius Cassius, advanced down the Euphrates and engaged in a significant engagement at Dura. The twin metropolises of Mesopotamia, Seleucia on the right bank of the Tigris and Ctesiphon on the left, were reached by the army of Cassius by the end of the year. The royal palace of Ctesiphon was destroyed by fire. Seleucia's inhabitants, who were still predominantly Greek, by the way, as the city had been established as the capital of the Seleucid Empire. That was one of the kingdoms that followed Alexander the Great, one of the successor kingdoms. Of course, they welcomed the invaders. Got a lot more in common with the Romans than they did with anybody else. Nevertheless, the whole city was burned, which, well, they probably regretted welcoming the newcomers after that. It was also a big damage to Lucius's reputation. The official version claimed that the Seleucids were the first to break faith, but excuses were either made up or desperately sought. In any case, this sacking represents a particularly damaging period in the protracted decline of Seleucia. Despite a lack of supplies and the consequences of a plague that was contracted in Seleucia, Cassius's army managed to return to Roman territory without incident. The news of the victory was brought to Rome by Iunius Maximus, a young tribunus Laticlavius, who was working for Cassius in the Third Gallica. Maximus was promoted to the quaestorship right away and was given a sizable monetary reward. In 166, Cassius's army crossed the Tigris into Media and resumed combat. Lucius assumed the title Medicus, and the emperors were once more acclaimed as imperatores. Once again, Marcus waited tactfully before taking the Parthicus Maximus. But of course, it wasn't the emperors that won that war. The success was largely attributed to subordinate generals. Claudius Fronto, an Asian provincial of Greek ancestry who had commanded the first Minervia in Armenia under Priscus, led the forces that advanced on Osroene. He was likely his family's first senator. For 165, Fronto served as consul, most likely in remembrance of Edessa's capture. In addition to serving under Priscus, Marcus Verus had led the 5th Macedonica to the front. In Gallia Narbonensis, Marcus Verus may have led Tolosa as his patria. But the most well-known general was Avidius Cassius, who commanded one of the Syrian legions, the 3rd Gallica. Cassius was a low-born young senator from Cyrus, a town in northern Syria. Despite not being a senator, his father was Heliodorus, was a respected figure who served as Hadrian's close assistant and accompanied the emperor on his travels. He also served as Egypt's prefect at the end of Hadrian's rule. With a strong sense of self-worth, Cassius also asserted that he was descended from Seleucid kings. Citation needed. Well, the consulships of 166 were accepted by Cassius and Marcus Verus, who were likely still in their mid-30s or thereabouts. Rome was the destination for the following 2 years, 166 to 168. The Historia Augusta claims that Verus maintained his opulent way of life and retained his caste of actors and favorite friends. He had a tavern constructed in his home, where he hosted parties with his friends until the break of dawn. He also liked to wander the city among the people, without revealing who he actually was. He also had a passion for circus games, particularly chariot racing. Of course, Marcus Aurelius was certainly raising more than a few eyebrows at this behavior, but he was effectively powerless to tell him what to do. After all, they were equals. You could make suggestions, but it wasn't like you could stop him. Either way, when the Marcomanni invaded Roman territory in 168, war was on again, and Verus did not believe that this war would ever come to an end, even though it did in 180. Either way, he did not live to see it. He became seriously ill and passed away in 168, when he and Marcus Aurelius returned home from the field. Although it's improbable, some writers do contend that he was poisoned, but it's most likely that it was the Antonine plague, which was the widespread epidemic at the time, that killed him. Of course, Marcus had lamented his adoptive brother's passing despite their differences. He travelled to Rome with the body and performed games in his honor. Following the funeral, Verus was proclaimed divine by the Senate and was to be worshipped as Divus Verus. And there you have it, Lucius Verus, a different kind of emperor, certainly living in the shadow of his brother. Well, I'd like to thank Dark, Gary, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Aaron, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, Jessica, Christine, Sally, Katiana, Christine, Fazabo, Legitmus, Maverick, Susan, Dr. Neuro Nerd, Cameron, Alexander, Nicholas, Daniel, JR, Charlene, Christopher, and Lynn. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Good night, everyone. As always, lots of love to you all, and please look after yourselves. See you next time.